Rings of Power Season 2 reviews are out, and the critics have run out of patience.
An evil, ancient, and powerful has returned.
Are you okay? Be very afraid.
We have everything from the Rings of Power makes Lord of the Rings a boring slog in a lifeless Season 2. It ranges from pure torture to wild ambition, a less puzzle-orientated plot, but makes calamitous filmmaking errors. It's a mirthless rollercoaster ride, rarely fraught with any tension, and the Irish Times were just glad that the wonky Irish accents had gone, which after their Season 1 said the new hobbits are filthy, hungry simpletons with stage Irish accents. I'm kinda surprised Amazon even gave them a review copy.
You shall not pass.
How'd I do? I'm so sorry, Ian.
And after they read this is a hugely flawed attempt to turn Lord of the Rings into Star Wars with staves, they probably wish they hadn't.
Throbbing.
TV's most expensive series remained stunningly boring, something that the Hollywood Reporter agreed with, that this is too epic for its own good, saying it focuses far more on the grand lore. You'll formulate ideas of what all this means, but precious little of it will feel like anything that might reach out and touch you. But really, was much of this a surprise to us? We know that this series was written before Season 1 was even shown, and they didn't really change anything from it. Oftentimes, they couldn't have changed anything, given that the showrunners were on writer's strike during filming. That meant that after the critics had already turned on the show, sure, they praised it originally. The Rings of Power is so astounding, it makes House of the Dragon look amateur. When the series was all over, well, now it's all over, let's come out and say it, The Rings of Power was a stinker. At least in this case, we won't have that problem. As you can see from this review, it says Akil Aurora has watched all 8 episodes of Rings of Power Season 2, which when you realise the critics had to sit through 8 hours of this, you can understand why they'd think it was boring.
Maybe some mercy's in order.
These dogs deserve nothing but our boot.
I'm already dreading watching 3 tomorrow. Remember in Season 1 when the showrunners called the audience patently evil? Well, we had that again in Season 2 with the G article, whereas the relatively radical decision to cast actors of colour in principal roles. We were so radical we decided to break the law, everybody. We have cast the first Eoch in human history. That would be playing the first elf of colour. But you know what? I'm just glad they spelt colour correctly, with a U. But once more, they dragged out Sophia Nomfet. This genre was closed to me before. And the showrunners were talking about toxic behaviour. We're not even going to justify it with a response. The audience is beneath me. And generally just crapping all over the fans, which is weird if you thought you were actually going to have any of them. No, instead they set the trap that when inevitably people come out and attack the boring show, well then they will come out and just write you off because you clearly just don't like Eox, do you? Why don't you like us destroying the law? And if you are unconvinced about the general attitude towards Season 2, well, I mean, IGN reviewed it, and they gave it a 6, which was okay. And if you don't know IGN, you can be like, well, you know, that's not that bad, is it? Until you find out that they reviewed She-Hulk and gave it an 8. They reviewed The Marvels and gave it an 8. They reviewed Willow and gave it a 9. So at least they're right about something. No, for IGN to go below an 8 is impressive and rare. And that's why when you look at the Rotten Tomato scores for Season 2, and it's got 82% from 33 reviews, oh, it actually doesn't sound bad. And then you look at them, and it's like, maybe all isn't quite as it seems. I mean, Zach Pope reviews, but why though? Toysto, The Film Yap, Digital Mafia Talkies. There are a lot of people that market as fresh, haven't heard of most of them. And among the ones that I have heard of, Dexerto, Variety, The Independent, IGN, Irish Times, Financial Times, The Wrap, Screen Rant, Hollywood Reporter, Collider. The reviews are far more mixed than 82% would make it look like. And even then, when you actually dive into the content of the reviews, it gets even stranger. For instance, the Seattle Times, though it's still troubled by some of the shallowness that preceded it, often falling flat in episodes dedicated to some of the more thinly written characters, still a welcome step up. I mean, yes, it's got all the problems of before, and it's overall trash. Better than the first one, though. Fresh. It doesn't really sound like a positive review to me. Fresh. And you get that in others. I mean, The Rings of Power Season 2 is a big step up from Season 1. Well, okay. Does that make it good, though? Well, last time you crapped in my mouth. This time, you've only done it on my chest. That's a huge improvement. Now, the real question is, why did no one stop you after the first time?
Get out! You stupid!
Now, I do wonder if all the critics had the same amount of episodes, because this goes the best first episodes of the series. It just needs to stay out of the weeds, and it's like, well, do you not know? Other people have seen the entire season. What did they give you, love? Unable to make you connect or draw you into the hearts and minds of the people. Riddled with bad dialogue. Ends up dooming it. The Prime Video series is knotty, dense, and sometimes contradictory. Fresh. In taking greater liberties with the source material, though Season 2 takes more of the lore and just burns it, The Rings of Power proves itself more emotionally honest and a true adaptation than anticipate. How low were your expectations if destroying the lore even more than last time is a truer adaptation than you thought it was going to be? Look, they did take Tolkien's corpse and then drop kick him in the face, but it's not as bad as I thought they were going to be. Could have been worse.
Hilarious.
And it's not like the people involved in the creation of this aren't supremely up themselves enough to think that they can lord it over the viewers. I mean, the showrunners compared Season 2 to Oppenheimer. We'd been sort of likening it to Oppenheimer. You're dealing with this world-changing power, and no one knows whether it's going to be for good or ill. Maybe both. They're so deep. No, this was a series that sold itself on just a couple of things. It was going to have more action.
Now we can begin. This season starts with a bang.
We can really, get into it.
The story is really moving on.
Well, we're in a higher gear.
Kind of high energy from the top.
It's a sense of real urgency and excitement.
It was going to have an all-female slate of directors, because if there's anyone renowned for liking, enjoying, and creating amazing action, it's an all-female director. And most laughably of all, The Rings of Power Season 2 is fully leaning into enemies to lovers, and I'm not mad about it. Yes, this is going to be Halandriel. We know Halandriel is going to be their official shipping name because Amazon put it in one of their own pissing adverts.
Sauron has returned.
No, I'm not joking. That is real. Now, personally, I think that Halandriel it's just a lazy name. You're just taking Galadriel's name and swapping the first letter over. And if that's all you're gonna do, I prefer Gowron. Yes, this is replicating the Acolyte's marketing strategy. How the Acolyte had a hot Sith baddie. Rings of Power saw that and thought, that's amazing. That'll really appeal to our target demographic. Completely misjudging the Lord of the Rings audience. An audience of which tends to be a bit higher brow. Not that Rings of Power knows it when they kept doubling down. Galadriel actor thinks she and Sauron share a psychic link. There's some sort of cosmic connection to us. The moment I found out that he was Satan himself, I just flooded the room. They're psychologically connected, and in other ways too. They mean at her vagina. In fact, this is the other thing they've tried to do. Galadriel and Sauron's cosmic connection defines Season 2. Now, it's not just something you're going to see in it. No, now it's actually going to define the entire series, which is different than they've said before, which was going to be that Sauron and Celebrimbor were going to define the series. Previously, they'd market it differently, as well as talking about the background noise of fans. In other words, we don't care about you. It was Sauron's bromance with Celebrimbor, which I think is the answer to this question.
So many of us in the LGBT community see ourselves in Tolkien's writings. Any chance we'll see ourselves on the show?
Maybe you have already.
I fully expected to see Celebrimbor getting bent over a forge. I thought they were going to prove once and for all that they are full in on representation. I expected to watch this in 4K and count the individual hairs. You're the ones that wanted to go down this road. Don't chicken out now. See what the family audience thinks of that one. It was funny, to be honest, when they were talking about reading criticism and comments. It's like, it didn't really change anything, It just all gets ground up and, maybe it affects you, maybe it doesn't. But we are our harshest critics, believe it or not. There's nothing that anyone can say about the show that we or one of our closest collaborators hasn't already said. And to that, I'm like, are you sure? What about that last bit? Did you suggest that to each other? Count the individual hairs. Well, my favorite thing about whenever they talk about writing, it's just, just giving me that Russell T Davies energy. It really is. I think I should mentor a new load of writers so they can be as good as me and burn decades-old IPs to the ground. Now that's talent.
Just seems like you two are a lot alike. You're both literal geniuses.
Empire Magazine absolutely loved it. Just like I'm sure they loved their world-exclusive Lord of the Rings Season 2 covers, where they talked about a villain to rule them all. A baddie. They started calling them all baddies rather than villains when they're going for that thirst angle. So nefarious that his name strikes fear into the minds of men and between the legs of elves.
She's an elf disgrace.
It's far from perfect with lacking storylines, but is able to capture the original themes. Fresh. IndieWires is bizarre. Not everyone leaps off the screen. A few nuanced emotional beats could have been portrayed with richer specificity, but Rings of Power does take advantage of TV's mightiest weapon for building empathy: time. This is literally, the acting was crap, the story was crap, but it does go on for a long time, seemingly forever. Fresh. A love letter to when fantasy was still too weird for normies. And for that, I give it props for sheer gumption. This is basically, it's bizarre and I didn't understand it, so congratulations. I just assumed it was good. The Rings of Power finally has the faintest hints of narrative momentum. As gorgeous, yet flat as a kitchen backsplash, has the same problems as the first, minus much of the confidence that these issues will ever go away. Now that is Variety. You know, the ones who said it was incredibly boring, and when they said patience it'll go away, well, they did like the first one. When they say patience has run out, really did with that one. It's a triumph! Always love that meme. It's an improvement over the first, as various powers attempt to seduce each other. I think he means literally.
She's in disgrace.
Variety talks about lots of forced, abrupt romances. In other words, everybody's banging.
I'm so sorry, Ian. I'm so sorry.
And that is more than enough for some reviewers, and all the female directors that made it. It's no surprise that the more of them you just cram into positions that they shouldn't be in, the more of this that you get. Oh, that's what really people really want! Why would they want analysis of morality when you can have such impeccable television as somebody filling a hole? When I'm watching other people bang on screen, I can almost forget to take my antidepressant. Although the cats do starve, you know, that's always a downside.
They'll never know what you sacrificed for them.
A tighter season would have been great. Dramatic action is bogged down by scenes focused on places and people who will only become important in the later stages of Middle-earth. Fresh. It should have been tighter, and why are we waffling around about these people that don't matter for thousands of years? They shouldn't have even been born yet, the dirty bats. That might be the nicest way of going. This was boring I've ever seen. Fresh. Full of noise and ambition, yet lacking the magic. Underwhelming. There is levity, if not actual laughs. Feels like a vacation. A confined package tour. Maybe we'll actually get into the place and its people next season. Remember when after season 1 they were like, look, we know that was boring, but season 2, we're going to kick this off from the start. It's going to be action all the way. Yeah, apparently not. At least according to the reviews. No, this is just more of the same from season 1, which is what you'd expect for a show that was written before season 1 even aired, and for people who, by their own admission, never even listened to the criticism, don't pay it any mind, and consider it to be background noise. It's a well-made show, but is it enough to make for memorable viewing? I'm not really sure. Fresh. You see what I mean about the fresh reviews aren't really fresh, are they? A worthy follow-up, though it follows a troubling pattern set forth by season 1. Fresh. That's Screen Rant, who said Amazon's grand plan crumbles as Sauron's begins. Fresh. Screen Rant love nothing more than attacking the audience. If they could defend the show at all, they would. And even they're like, well, quite boring, isn't it really? I actually didn't know this. I just found it in a Google search when I typed Screen Rant and backlash. The backlash against Rings of Power led to hiring an on-set therapist for the cast. My show's awful, and... seriously, how am I supposed to believe that you are ancient warriors who go to war against Satan himself? And well, somebody was mean online.
Walk up to a girl and start a conversation. Would you tell her that so you could review? Would that be the thing you would do? Would you tell her that?
Begins to deliver payoff. Not the whole loan, but enough to be initially intriguing. Fresh. This is season 2. You're supposed to be into the meat of the story. Supposed to be in the meat of the story in season 1, actually. That's actually where the story is supposed to start. There's a lot of storylines. Some of them are captivating. Fresh. With all this in mind, I can understand why Alron decided to do a new movie about Tourette's, titled I Swear, because if I knew the reviews were going to be this bad, I too would want to get paid just screaming, fuck! I mean, the red carpets themselves didn't exactly inspire faith in the series for me. I mean, to be fair, Deezer, I think she was cosplaying as a spaceship with a solar sail, and the images tell you everything you need to know about the show. Namely, let's put all the important women up front, and then put the main characters hiding in, like, there's Sauron just peeking around, and considering the show's meant to be about Sauron and Celebrimbor. Where's Celebrimbor? Oh yeah, he's over here, just at the edge. Can you please scoot over? No, I can a bit further, mate. I can still see you. This picture wasn't even their worst one. While you can rank the importance based upon the most important people are at the front in the middle, while all the men that don't matter are just shoved everywhere else, it got worse in the second one they're taking, where they really showed who they cared about, because you can't even argue this one's made by size. I can't even see the people over at the back. I don't know who they are. You're too short to be seen at the back? Well, who cares, really? You're not... Your face isn't that important, is it? When you realise that's the metric they went by, is dwarf over here had to peek out from the side just so he could be seen. Sauron has to lean out at 45 degrees just to be seen by a camera. If the series is all about Sauron and he's ever so important, why is he always shoved at the back? Both pictures. Don't worry though, Miriel, majorly important she is. That's why Miriel is front and centre in every single picture, despite apparently Numenor only having one episode in the first half of the season. Front and centre of marketing, barely relevant in the show. And after his salty comments,
every show needs to park themselves in certain characters per season.
So I have a feeling that the elf is the same.
You don't need to be in every scene to feel that moment still like reverberating. I myself, I'm extremely excited about Sauron.
In fact, even the main characters, they just don't have much screen presence in this season. Like, the creators keep talking about the steps they took to level up season 2. It's grounded, grittier, more dramatic, and very emotional. But then you have Galadriel coming out and just being like, oh, it's been ever so dark to be part of this show. I was totally unprepared for the fan hate towards Galadriel. That's why now Galadriel is going to take up space, and she's unapologetic.
She's an elf disgrace.
Or as Morford Clark said previously,
you know, powerful women, they make people cross, and I feel blessed to play her.
I was totally unprepared when the season came out. There was a really dark side. The negativity came primarily from men. That would be because the audience is primarily male. Men are interested in things, women are interested in people. That means as a whole, movies, TV series, entertainment, it's a heavily male-dominated space. Have you considered creating your own knitting patterns? I mean, then you'd have a different audience. Lots of the criticism I've got were for things making other people feel liberated while watching Galadriel. It doesn't matter though, does it? If the criticism was that you weren't Galadriel because Galadriel doesn't ride around in armor, it doesn't matter if other people like it. Reality is objective. What Galadriel is objective, and you changed it. So people complained about it. Now, I know you have a chip on your shoulder, and because those people have dangly bits, you didn't like the criticism. But it doesn't make the criticism any less worthy. It's not other people's fault that you have a problem with their gender. You can analyze your unconscious bias, get over it, and be better. I believe in you. I didn't want her to act like a human woman who's been taught not to be abrasive. You absolutely nailed that one. Galadriel was a complete arsehole. Maybe that would explain why the audience didn't like her. Why is my hero a prick?
You leapt into the sea to save one life.
Guess I'll just die.
The sea is always right.
She added that every character she's played has shame built in, and Galadriel maybe she should. Maybe she should have been ashamed of her own behavior. That's a problem. It's fun to think what Galadriel's unlikable decisions led to. Would Sauron have found his way to power so quickly if she didn't help him? No. He just wanted to grill. He was going to be good.
I have been searching for my peace for longer than you know. For both our sakes, let me keep it.
He wanted to leave his old life behind, and you dragged him back to evil.
Your sorrow cannot ease my pain. I know what a hammer and tongs is yours.
Sauron lives because of you!
Galadriel, unironically, the most evil person on Middle-earth. Or will it turn out that she might be able to defeat him one day because she helped him and got to know him in the process? Only if you have incredibly bad writing. So yes, she's painfully open. She'd like to be closed, but she knows that she can't be. That's why Sauron's just gonna be...
She's an elf disgrace.
What has happened to this show? The series makes room for vulnerable conversation. The writing is so dispassionate and unhuman that it's hard to feel and relate to the characters. They feel cold, distant, and lifeless, riddled with bad dialogue, and that frequently ends up dooming it. To add to the misery, it's a great start. The writing's problems aren't limited to the actors' lines. The first 3 episodes are pure torture, providing so little of note that I found myself looking at the birds outside my window. The series improves in episode 4, only for a middling 5th to slam the brakes and buy time for the season's endgame. Episode 7 is no doubt the highlight, though its ambition outmatches the execution. And by the time you put all 8 together, you can't help but feel that it's a movie that's been stretched to fit 8 hours of television, which is the same for many streaming shows. They have at most 2 hours worth of content, which they spread across 8 hours. We've seen time and time again since money came into the streaming arena. They just take a movie script and drag it out longer, like that's what they think television is. About time they realized you can't take movie writers and put them on television. They don't have the ability.
It is a minority. It's such a minority. A tiny bunch of little whinging who are on the wrong side of history, and they'll all go away soon.
They can only keep an idea going for 90 minutes, and after that, they just fill it. Television is an entirely different arena, and it requires different people who have actual experience in it. So as we know, the series starts with Halbrand's backstory, how he's betrayed by Adar and ended up on the raft. What exactly are we expected to glean from this unasked-for backstory? The showrunners actually told you this? You're supposed to feel sorry for him, for Sauron, Satan. Honestly, he did have to spend time with Galadriel, so I think that's enough to make me pity anybody, to be honest. honest. Especially when all he wanted to do was grill and she dragged him back to work. So Celebrimbor is central to this, and although Galadriel told Celebrimbor to avoid Halbrand, it turns out Celebrimbor just wants to brag to him, and that's it. It's like, oh well. Plus, it helps that Celebrimbor is unaware that Halbrand is Sauron. That's Galadriel's fault. I can't believe you wrote that she's too thick to tell people who Sauron is. Also, the fact that Sauron walks out of a fire at him should probably tell him. Over in Lindon, Galadriel and Elrond inform their king about Halbrand's identity. Why didn't you tell Celebrimbor? If you're going to start telling people, it's not a secret. So then Elrond runs away with the rings, which we've seen in one of the clips.
Elrond, no!
The first episode finds Galadriel chasing the rings, a thoroughly mediocre beginning, just what you want from a season 2. The season 2 premiere moves so slowly that it bores you to death. I can't recall a single scene that held my attention, where the characters discuss something that gripped me. It all just washes over you. Elsewhere with the stranger, he searches for purpose, but it all progresses quite slowly, with the tale greatly reduced in scope versus what happening elsewhere. Tom's introductory scene is one of the highlights, more so because everything else leading up to it is so unmemorable. But the real highlight for many, though, will be episode 7, that depicts an episode-long siege of an elven kingdom. I respect the ambition, but the siege doesn't feel as epic as it ought to, much like the rest of the show. Dialogue scenes are spliced in to undercut momentum, and the direction must shoulder some of the blame. Few positives. A stodged mess. Sauron says, midway into the season, I am certain that we will complete the Rings of Power. Maybe Amazon is, but I'm not. The creators have welded themselves so thoroughly to their 5-season pitch that they have seemingly blinded themselves to what makes a good episodic TV. Each hour must have the legs to stand on its own. This is a stodged mess with staggeringly little. Unless the show revises its grand plan, I fear it might run itself into oblivion. Tell us how you really feel, Akil.
I cannot even believe those words just came out of your face towards my face.
And Variety doesn't hold anything back either, backing a lot of that up with things like, I could think of few memorable moments, but I can't think of any characters that I care about, any emotions that I felt, which is the key to any series being entertaining. But of course, as Variety says, that's par for the course with this Amazon drama. It's exactly what everyone expected, and so they weren't let down. Rather than a thrilling sense of discovery, Rings of Power instead instills a bleary disorientation, like you've shown up at a college lecture without doing the required reading. When I told a family member I was reviewing this series, they expressed a surprise they hadn't heard of a show set in Middle-earth. We soon realized they had watched the entirety of season 1 and yet had not only forgotten the details, but its very existence. And when it comes to Rings of Power, there's no difference from normal viewer and dementia patient. Season 2 includes more of the wooden dialogue. Strange how that which is left behind can be the heaviest burden to carry, which isn't true. Doesn't actually even make any sense.
Do you know why a ship floats and a stone cannot?
I remain more aware that I'm meant to find the Harfoots charming than I'm actually charmed by their antics. If you're the kind of person who is excited to meet Tom Bombadil, Rings of Power is made for you. If you're not, it isn't, and it's no longer even attempting to convince you otherwise. And that is an interesting part of this review. Through a lot of it, they basically say, if you're heavily into Lord of the Rings, you'll like the show. If you're not into Lord of the Rings, you won't be. But I think that's just because they're not into Lord of the Rings, and so they assume that their inability to understand it is because they haven't read the books or don't particularly care about it. And yet, if you talk to people who are heavily into the Lord of the Rings, they also hate it because it's not Lord of the Rings. It can be tempting to assume that your lack of knowledge is what's making you not like it, when really, it's just because it's not done very well. This isn't a show that cares about canon. In fact, one of the reviews said because it didn't follow canon, it made it a better adaptation for some reason. No, this is a show where you kind of begin to think, I don't know who it's made for. At least other places, I could tell you the target demographic, like The Acolyte. I know who The Acolyte's made for. I actually think it's a good show for them. It's just that those people don't watch Star Wars. But when it comes to Rings of Power, I have absolutely no idea. I think I could tell you who they're trying to aim it at. You know, Galadriel, girl boss. Oh no, I'm hated because I'm strong and powerful. And I'm taking up space. Yes, all of those are key words that can tell me the demographic you're aiming at, that don't watch Lord of the Rings. But I still don't think that's the target demographic. The rest of the show doesn't seem to be aimed at them either. And it makes me wonder if all the different storylines of the characters, you're trying to drag in multiple different audiences who may like a storyline each. So that you've literally just gone down ticking as many boxes as possible because you think that's what gets you a wide audience. And it isn't. The way you should make a show is pick a target demographic and make something just for them. That way, especially if it's a traditionally male show, you will bring in some other people who also share those values and tastes. But if you make a show for everybody, it ends up being for nobody. That seems to be what Rings of Power has ended up as. As much like Wheel of Time, the problem with Rings of Power isn't just that it breaks canon. It's not just a bad show if you like like Tolkien's writing and want them to follow that. It's just a bad show on its face. It's bad writing on the face of it. And their issue is you can't fix that because all of the executives for the first one are still here, the showrunners are still here, and you decided to double down with an all-female directing team for reasons that I can only assume involve money and a fire. And so, as the reviews themselves say, that the first 3 episodes are pure torture, it's gonna be one hell of a night. But those are just my thoughts. What are yours? Let me know down in the comments below. Like the video if you liked the video. Subscribe for more videos like this in the future, and I will see you in the next one. Bye-bye.